Alright, this is part 2 of a series where I try to go through the entire Talmud in an organized, summarized manner, or at least part 2 of book 1. My whole preface and intro is in the first video, so to avoid being repetitive, I'm just going to assume that you saw that one and resume straight into the text. So, let's begin. Alright, chapter 2. The Mishnah begins by discussing a case wherein what if somebody hasn't yet said the Shema prayer, but they coincidentally read it in the Torah, the verses which comprise the Shema. In such a case, it counts, as long as they do so with the proper intent. What about interrupting in the middle of saying the Shema? Generally, it's not allowed, but Rabbi Meir says you can say or respond hello to somebody in between paragraphs, out of respect, and during the paragraph itself if you're afraid of this person harming you if you ignore them. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, says in between paragraphs you can respond to somebody out of respect and greet any other person, and within the actual paragraph you can greet someone due to fear and respond to somebody out of respect. The different paragraphs are the first blessing, the second blessing, the Shema, the Haya, Vayomer, and Emes V'Yatziv. Rabbi Yehuda holds that those last two are actually one paragraph. This order is explained that Shema is first because that's accepting the responsibility of following God, then Vahaya because that's accepting the responsibility of doing mitzvahs, and then Vayomer is last because that one's only said during the day. Okay, now for the Gemara. Based on that first statement of the Mishnah, that when saying Shema from the Torah you need intent, we can learn that all mitzvahs require that they be done with the proper intents. Also, the rule it says about coincidentally saying Shema while just reading the Torah applies when you're not reading the Torah by prayer, but just going through it to edit it and see if it was written properly. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that Shema must be read in Hebrew, based on the fact that the verse says these words will be on your heart, implying in the original text. The rabbis say it can be said in whatever language you want, as it says, "Hear, Israel," implying in whatever language. Rabbi Yehuda says that those words are used to teach you that you need to say it audibly, while the rabbis would say it's fine if you don't hear yourself say it. As for what the rabbis learn from the words will be, they learn that you can't say Shema out of order, while Rabbi Yehuda learns that from the verse, the words, which is redundant in its context. Also, Rabbi Yehuda's statement that specifically Shema must be read in Hebrew might lead you to believe that everything else can be read in English, but no, he says everything must be in Hebrew in general, and he specifies Shema here for all the above confusion with the different things you can learn from different words, and the same exact logic in the inverse applies by the rabbis, that they also hold that the whole Torah can be read in any language, but they specify here because, again, of all the above confusion. We can also learn from some of the words that only the first part of Shema requires intent, not necessarily by the rest. Rabbi Akiva disagrees, saying it says, "which I command you this day will be on your heart," implying the whole thing requires intent, and that's the opinion we hold like. Some say it's the first paragraph only that needs intent, some say just the second, some say for both based on the verse, "and you shall place these words on your heart," while others take the verse to learn that the arm tefillin are placed on your upper bicep next to your heart, which they are. They then argue back and forth a while on the verses, whether they imply the need for intent for both paragraphs, only one, etc., whether the verses are used to teach the need for Torah study, or others. In the end, Rava says that the rule is like the one who says we only require intent at the opening verse of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and that's it. Also, some say pronouncing that last word Echad properly, whether by stressing the Ches or the Daled, will reward you with long life. There's also a very brief story where a rabbi admires Rabbi Chia bar Abba for doing just that. It also says to say the words Al Livavecha on your heart while standing in one place, the implication being for the entire verse. There's also some conversation about how Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the original author of the Mishnah, said that Shema, which was that he said just the first verse, and did a full proper accepting of God over him later while covering his face while studying. Specifically studying about the exodus from Egypt because that's a part of the Shema prayer and he wanted to say that in its proper time. Based on this, it shows that if you say the first verse of Shema and then accidentally fall asleep, it's fine and sufficient. In addition, because it's disrespectful to lie on your back while saying the Shema, don't do that and sit properly. Also, you shouldn't be lying on your back when you sleep at all for other reasons. Rather, a person should sleep on their side. Also, Rabbi Yochanan would lie on his back while saying the Shema, but that was because he had health issues. Okay, back to the original point. Rabbi Meir said you can greet people between Shema paragraphs out of respect. More specifically, Rabbi Meir holds that you can greet and respond due to respect between paragraphs, and greet and respond due to fear within the actual paragraphs. Rabbi Yehuda holds that you can greet due to respect and respond for any reason within the actual paragraphs, and that you can greet due to fear and respond due to respect within the actual paragraphs. There's a very similar case cited elsewhere. On this note, can you interrupt during Hallel or Megillas Esther? Those are only a rabbinic decree, and if this is allowed, for sure those too. Or perhaps not, as they have unique qualifications, meaning to publicize a miracle. Rabbi Chia says you can interrupt there. Rabbah says by a full Hallel, you can only interrupt between paragraphs, while by a half Hallel, the shortened variant of this prayer said on certain days, you can interrupt wherever. There's also a point tossed in where one rabbi, Ravina, didn't greet a different stage during his prayer, but that was because he was his superior, so he didn't have to. Side point, if somebody is fasting and preparing food for after the fast, can they just taste the food? Is the fasting from eating or from enjoying taste? Answer is, you can taste. How much? Up to a quarter of a log, which was an old form of measurement. Another side point. Rav says, if you greet somebody in the morning prior to prayer, it's akin to idol worship. Shmuel says, no. They're arguing over the interpretation of a verse, and it's simply that greeting somebody before prayer is disrespectful. Also, you're allowed to greet somebody very early by your door if you just meet them there. There's a similar conversation elsewhere, and others say you can't attend to your business prior to prayer, but if you pray prior to dealing with your personal stuff, God will help you with whatever you do. Bit of a random point now. According to one guy, if you go 7 days without seeing a dream, you're called wicked. If you learn lots of Torah before sleep, you won't receive bad tidings. Okay, back to Shema. We hold with the opinion that you can't interrupt between the last paragraphs between the words Elokechem and Emes V'Yatziv. There's an argument about whether you should repeat the word Emes a second time. Some say yes, some say no. There's also a few opinions about if we say the portion about tzitzis, whether by day or by night, whether the whole paragraph or only some of it, and we also make sure to mention the Exodus. We said we say the prayer of Shema prior to V'haya, as you want to first accept responsibility to do what God says, and then mitzvahs. There are some other reasons too. Shema speaks about learning, and then V'haya is about teaching, and then Vayomer is about performing, with the mitzvah of tzitzis. Actually, Shema mentions all three, to teach, to learn, and then to perform. V'haya mentions learning and then performing, and Vayomer just mentions performing, although all of these reasons apply. So, to introduce a new question, the Gemara quotes a point about that a gravedigger isn't obligated to say the Shema, and then later says he is. So the difference between those two cases is if you have somebody helping you out. If you do, then you're required to still say Shema, and if you don't, then not. However, that source mentions you put on your tefillin and then say Shema, while Rav would say Shema and then put on tefillin. So, by him, in that case, it was that somebody brought him his tefillin late. Normally, everybody holds that you say Shema after wearing tefillin. There's a question from a Rav Chia bar Ashi, who seems to imply otherwise, but that's explaining that he's just teaching to say blessings before learning. In fact, saying Shema without tefillin is compared by some to bearing false testimony against yourself, or offering an improper sacrifice. Instead, the proper order of things in the morning is to first use the restroom, wash your hands, put on tefillin, say Shema, and then pray. If you can't wash your hands in the morning as you have no water, just wipe them against the surface. However, by praying, you should try hard to get water, even traveling up to a distance of a parsa, or out of your way less than a mil. Both of those are old forms of measurements. Okay, new Mishnah. If you say Shema out loud but couldn't hear yourself, it's sufficient. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says if you don't properly pronounce everything in the Shema, it's fine. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that. If you say Shema out of order, it's insufficient, and you should go back to wherever you made a mistake and start over from there. And now the Gemara on this piece. The difference of opinions as to whether you need to hear yourself say Shema is based on how you explain the word Shema, which means hear. One says it means you must hear yourself say it. The other says it means that you can say it in any language you can hear and understand. Rabbi Yossi would hold this too, along with his opinion. Rabbi Yossi also holds similarly to saying a blessing over separating teruma, just a bit more leniently, in that it's permissible after the fact, just not initially, as that's a rabbinic institution, not biblical. We know it was him that said it based on some words which imply so, but as it turns out, that's actually disproven, and no, that opinion or the Truma was actually said by Rabbi Yehuda. There's a very similar case discussed about the reading of the Megillah, whether or not you need to be able to hear yourself saying the words. It's discussed back and forth for a bit, quoting sources and attributing those sources to different people, but the results are similar. Some say only by Shema is there an option to not have to hear yourself say it. Others disagree, saying the inverse, but yeah, that's a whole thing. The conclusion is that we rule leniently here, that it's allowed by Shema, and also, if your enunciation wasn't precise, it's also fine. Side point, there's a comparison cited between a grave and a womb. How are they comparable? That they both take something in and give something out, the grave by the resurrection of the dead. The implication of this is that a baby leaves the body with lots of noise and crying, and a person enters a grave with lots of noise and crying, so too he should leave the grave with lots of noise and crying by the resurrection of the dead. We also learn in the Shema from the word uchsav tam, and you shall write them, that on the mezuzah and tefillin, all the requisite verses must be written on them, including even the command to do so, unlike the writing done by the Saita process, which is a whole thing for later, where they didn't also write the commands. In addition, in regards to the writing, you should leave spaces between words where the last and first letters are the same, so that way everything's clear, particularly in all of these spaces. On this note, it's taught that if you're very particular about saying Shema properly with the proper enunciations, Gehenna will be cooler for you. There's also a comparison between streams and tents, as streams can purify a person, so too learning Torah can tip your scale towards merit. The Mishnah had said that if you say Shema out of order, it doesn't count. On this note, there's a brief story about two rabbis who were tying a wedding canopy, and one of them went to go learn something, and he was taught that if you made a mistake while saying the Shema but don't know exactly where, if you're in the middle of a paragraph, go back to the beginning of the paragraph. If you're between paragraphs, go back a paragraph. If you made a mistake between the two times it says the words to write in the Shema, go back to the first time, assuming you haven't gotten to the end of the paragraph, and said, in order to lengthen your days. New Mishnah. In regards to the level of concentration necessary while saying Shema, you're actually permitted to say it while working on top of a tree or on a wall during construction, unlike by the Amida. On the other hand, you would be exempt from saying Shema on the night of your wedding, as you'd be a bit distracted, all the way up to the Saturday night after. Rabban Gamliel, when he got married, still said the Shema because he said it was too important. Okay, Gemara on this portion. The trees that are permissible to pray on are only fig and olive trees, as their branches are shaped in a safe way that you won't be distracted if you're standing on them. If it's at your own home that you're doing this, however, you need to go down to pray. There's a question asked on this, that perhaps this implies you can say Shema without proper focus and intent if all this is allowed. An answer is brought that you can only say Shema on a tree if you're not actively working and can concentrate. Specifically, the first paragraph, that is. The later paragraphs you can work during. In fact, there's a different source which says that a worker is responsible for basically every part of prayers, excluding going to the ark and the priestly blessing. There is an opinion that says that a paid worker, in this case, would do an abridged Amida, but that doesn't apply in this case discussed, as our case refers to laborers who are working for food, not pay, and don't get to do an abridged Amida or blessings after eating. Okay, we said a groom is exempt from saying Shema. This doesn't apply by a widow, by the way. The reason is based on the verse, when you sit in your home and when you walk along the way, which exempts somebody from doing a mitzvah and a groom, respectively, as the implication of the words is that of a voluntary action. So, if something isn't voluntary, you're exempt from saying the Shema then. Maybe when you walk along the way actually means walking to do a mitzvah, and it's actually saying that you're obligated specifically while doing a mitzvah, and the answer is no, because the Hebrew word used is your way, which implies something voluntary, hence you're exempt if you're doing something involuntary. Specifically, in this case of a groom, and not with something you're preoccupied with voluntarily, such as travel, and not with a widow, as apparently that's less distracting. New Mishnah. This is a bit of a continuation of the previous, which left off speaking about Rabban Gamliel when he got married, and it picks up from there. When Rabban Gamliel's wife passed, he immersed himself in water, which is generally not allowed for mourners, but he was an exception as he was very delicate in that regard. In addition, when Rabban Gamliel's servant, a guy named Tavi, passed away, Rabban Gamliel accepted condolences for him like a relative, as apparently he was a very virtuous man. Back to Shema on your wedding night. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, even if you want to, not everybody should do that. And now the Gemara to discuss this. Rabban Gamliel was exempt from certain difficult particularities of mourning, as apart from the day of the actual death, everything after is only a rabbinic ordinance, so you can be made exempt in extreme circumstances for stuff during the later days. In regards to him mourning his servant, normally that's not something done, as seen in a story where this other sage, a Rabbi Eliezer's maidservant, passed, and all his students followed him around all day to offer condolences, so he avoided them, but they just kept following him around all around the building until eventually he told them that they couldn't take a hint and should leave him alone. In this regard to how to eulogize people, there's a discussion on titles. The term patriarch is only offered to the biblical forefathers, and matriarch to the biblical foremothers, as those are the most significant ones. Similarly, you shouldn't refer to your servants as father or mother, except for Rabban Gamliel's servants, as they were exceptionally worthy people. Back to Shema. It says the verse, "So I will bless you as I live, to your name I will raise my hands." This means to say both the Shema and the Avodah, respectively, and the reward is this world and the world to come. Then the Gemara lists a bunch of different variations of the Yehi Ratzon prayer said at the end of the Amidah. Many rabbis have their own variation, and most of them are not the accepted variation. Of note is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's version, which speaks about personal protection and safety from dangers of every sort, in spite of the fact that he was a very well-guarded man, being a friend of the then Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and while that prayer isn't said in the Amidah, we do say it at the beginning of prayers in the morning instead. Then it just keeps on going, listing even more variations of the prayer than a prayer said by one during a fast, and a prayer said when you finish reading the book of Iyov or Job. It's about a page or so of just different prayers said by the sages. I'm not going to go through each one word for word, as again, most of these aren't the accepted custom, it's just what they personally said, so moving on. Then the Gemara gets even more off topic and just lists a bunch of idioms taught by a bunch of different sages. I won't read them word for word, even though that kind of defeats the purpose of an idiom, as that would take a really long time, and this is intended as a summary. But if you want a collection of just idioms, quotes, and sayings from these sages, there is a book which is exactly that, penned around the same time as this, known as Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of Our Fathers. So, Rabbi Meir spoke about the importance of learning Torah and not doing anything wrong, and that God would be with you. The sages of Yavne taught that for some, their purpose is to learn Torah, and that's what they do, and for others, their purpose is to work in the field. One is not better than the other, both are fulfilling their individual purpose, and don't presume to be better than a worker because you learn more Torah than him. Abaya said, "Be careful to have fear of heaven and create peace with your brethren, relatives, and everybody, Jew and non-Jew alike, so that God will be happy with everybody." Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai would always greet people first in the marketplace. Rava said that the point of Torah wisdom is to repent and do good deeds. If you do it to try and glorify yourself or to become haughty in your knowledge, that's wrong, and if you learn Torah not for its own sake, you'd be better off not having been created. Rav said, "In the world to come, there is no eating, drinking, procreation, negotiations, jealousy, hatred, or competition. Rather, the righteous sit with crowns, basking in God's presence. Also, there is a greater promise for the future to women than men, based on a verse, and this is achieved by them helping their family learn Torah." Okay, after that, then it lists a bunch of individual blessings said by people as they left their respective teachers' study halls, blessings for a good life, and they should do good deeds, and that no bad of any form should form within the Jewish people. Side point. Some say that the entire world is sustained because God is charitable, while some righteous are sustained because they deserve it. Some say that the world is sustained on behalf of the righteous, and the righteous themselves just exist. There's a famous story here where it says that every day the voice of God descends from Mount Horeb, and says that the entire world exists only due to the merit of a Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who was a particularly holy man, and apparently ate a lot of carobs. Then, for some reason, they say that the people of the cities of Gevai and Mata Mahasya are exceptionally foolish, and also none of them ever converted to Judaism. So, that's that. Back to Shema. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, a groom can in theory say Shema after his wedding, but it's better not to, as you don't want to appear presumptuous. This contradicts his logic on the fast of the 9th of Av, saying you shouldn't do any work on this day, as is done if you are a Torah scholar, which could be considered presumptuous. So what's the difference? The same contradiction applies to the rabbis who say you should say Shema by your wedding, being in a sense presumptuous, but you should also do work on the fast day, which is not. One answer is that you just switch the opinions around to make it fit. The other answer is that the rabbis have their logic that by Shema, everyone is saying Shema in general, so you do like everybody else is doing, and on the fast, most people are working, so you should also work, so as to not be conspicuous and appear presumptuous in either case. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel would say that since it's your wedding, everybody knows that you're not concentrating properly if you say Shema, so it would actually be more conspicuous to say Shema, and by working on the fast, it's not really conspicuous to not work, as lots of people aren't working while they're in public. So their logics actually do line up with themselves. And with that brings us to the end of Chapter 2. I hope to have Chapter 3 out as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.